Trump and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson had a face-to-face sit-down at the White House yesterday. It was their second meeting since the president learned through NBC News reporting that his top diplomat called him a moron in a meeting with officials last July. And this morning, we have a stunning new NBC News exclusive on that tense national security meeting last summer. The bombshell report cites 3 officials who were in the room and says the president called for a dramatic, nearly tenfold increase in America's nuclear arsenal, leaving his own top officials caught off guard. It came after the president saw a slide that illustrated the nation's nuclear stockpile, which has seen a steady reduction since the 1960s. Officials were forced to explain the legal and practical challenges to a nuclear buildup. The president's position raised immediate questions about his understanding of America's nuclear posture and left some national security officials rattled about his grasp of other national security issues. It was shortly after the meeting concluded that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was heard calling the president a moron. We don't exactly know why Tillerson said that about the president. Get a gander, though. Let's bring in now the lead author of this NBC News exclusive, NBC News national security and military reporter, Courtney Kube. Joe, you can take the first question.
Sure, Courtney. So obviously, the flashy headline has to do with the 10-fold increase in nuclear weapons in our nuclear stockpile, which couldn't be done for so many reasons. But there also seemed to be an unease among all of these military leaders and diplomatic leaders that Donald Trump was asking for more of everything and basically asked for everything this side of Dr. Evil's idea of having sharks with lasers on them. Is that what was so unsettling to them?
Yeah, I have to admit I never asked anyone whether there was any talk of sharks in the tank that day, but he did. Numerous people, numerous sources who were familiar with the meeting, who were in the meeting, told my colleagues and I that there was, so this meeting was a look at the world. They went through the entire world. They did what the military calls a force posture review. They looked at the layout of troops all around the world, U.S. troops, of assets, ships, aircraft, everything all over the world. And this included a slide, a briefing slide that showed the nuclear arsenal for the U.S. And it showed a historical look at it. So, from the more than 70 years ago when the U.S. nuclear program first began to today. And of course, that peaked during the Cold War and then started to come down in the late 60s, early 70s. And, sources who we spoke with said that the president looked at that and said, well, why don't I have that many? Why don't I have more? And then there was a conversation about, what you mentioned, Joe, is just that it's not really feasible to increase it for numerous reasons, because of treaty obligations, because of budget. The U.S. doesn't have the budget to increase it right now. But I think it left some people, we're told that it left some people in the room a little surprised. One of the other vignettes that we were told about was when they were talking about the U.S. posture in South Korea, which of course is, a huge, in the news right now, is a huge national security concern, is North Korea and the buildup there. And that the president's, looked at the number of troops and the assets that are there and said, well, I don't understand. Why isn't South Korea happy that we have this big defensive posture there? Why aren't they happy that we have so many troops and assets? And they had to explain, the history of it and why there are so many troops, why there are so many Americans there and what they do and how it benefits not only South Korea, but it benefits the United States to have a presence there.
Hey, Courtney, it's Willie. Great reporting here. I think this comes to the surprise of not many people. A man who puts great stock in superlatives, having the biggest or the best, whether it's his hotels or now a nuclear arsenal. I don't think this should be a great surprise to a lot of people, but I'm curious about how he reacted when he was told by the people in the room, the experienced hands in that room, that we have nuclear disarmament treaties. That's why the number has come down over the years. How did he react? Did he push back against that?
So one of the sources said, he wants more nukes. So there was a discussion afterwards where they explained to him, like you said, the treaties. And one of the big things you have to consider here is, there's not a budget to increase the number of nukes in the U.S. And that would be an enormous, that's not something that could just quickly be turned overturned, that there would suddenly be a budget to increase the number of nuclear weapons to the United States. And also, there is this importance of the balance between the conventional force and the nuclear force. There is a very delicate balance that military leaders understand. They understand the utility of the fact that the conventional force is what the United States uses. You know, look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at Afghanistan, look at Libya, you know. The nuclear force is much more of a deterrent value, provides a deterrent value against, you know, the United States enemies. They look at this very strong nuclear program that the United States has, and the hope is that, and the reason that the United States hasn't used a nuclear weapon in 70 years, is that because this deterrence keeps enemies from doing something that would provoke any kind of a nuclear response. So this is something that was, you know, we are told by numerous sources, was explained to President Trump. And, you know, some people that we spoke with said, part of this is sort of his way in a meeting. Mm-hmm. He asks these very provocative, very probing questions. He wants his cabinet members, his military leaders, he wants his people to think outside the box. And so he was asking a number of questions throughout this entire, you know, briefing that at times was described to us as somewhat tense. He asked a number of questions that raised some eyebrows.
Yeah. He certainly did raise some eyebrows, and actually the president's tweeting this morning trying to deflect from the concern inside his actual cabinet that he's a moron. Courtney, thank you very much.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories, and you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.